Hey guys, new video. This is a big one. My top 10 favorite games of all time. I'm actually surprised I haven't done this, but I've had a few requests to do this kind of video. And you know what? There were a few games that I wanted to play again, like some of my favorite games from the past I wanted to play again before I did a list like that. But I figure, you know what? Let's just go ahead, do the list. I'll put it as 2015. My 2015 top 10, and then we'll see if it changes. Like 5 or 6 years from now, if I'm still doing YouTube, I'll do another list and see if anything changed. So, you know, the list wasn't actually as hard to put together as I thought, but like there's a ton of honorable mentions I've got. I'm just gonna list them all after I go through the top 10 because there's quite a bit. But the top 10 was actually not too bad. Putting them in order was a little tricky, but if you've been following my channel for a long time, some of these won't surprise you. A lot of these choices aren't going to surprise a lot of people. A lot of you guys will probably be able to guess a lot of the games on this list. Maybe not the order, but my number one is pretty obvious because I've said it many times. But yeah, my top 10 favorite games of all time. Let's just immediately jump in with number 10, which is a recent game. A game I just played not too long ago, which is kind of surprising. There's actually two games that made this list that are fairly recent. Or at least that I've played fairly recently. But at number 10 is Final Fantasy Tactics. Yeah. So this game, not only is this is my favorite Final Fantasy game, and not only that, it's my favorite strategy RPG of all time. And it really surprised me, and it really opened my eyes to the possibility of the strategy RPG genre, like how great those types of games can be. I think it's got the best implementation of the job system ever, even beating like Bravely Default. I think the job system just works so well for a strategy RPG where you've got a bunch of different units and you kind of experiment with their jobs and kind of create your own hybrid jobs and take abilities from other jobs and apply them to different characters. It had a really involving kind of dark storyline that I really appreciated, that I really got into. It's got one of the best endings I've ever seen in an RPG. I can't think of many games that have an ending better than this one. The characters were really strong and well developed. The writing, I thought, was quite good. You know, I said in my review that I wasn't super crazy about the localization for the War of the Lions version, but overall the game, I think, is still well written. The gameplay is just, it kept me hooked for so long. I was just so addicted to this game, I could not put it down, despite some frustrations with it. It really kind of made me really want to dive into more strategy RPGs too. It kind of, like, the best thing I can say about it is the fact that it opened my eyes to a whole new genre that I've kind of been lukewarm on in the past, and now I'm playing through Fire Emblem Awakening, and I know I just did my video on that saying that I struggled to get into it, but now I'm loving it. And, you know, I just want to play all these strategy RPGs. I played Stella Glow. Ever since finishing Tactics, I'm craving all these strategy RPGs. And, you know, some people prefer Tactics Ogre. There's a Tactics Ogre remake on the PSP, and I'm going to play that at some point, because apparently that's very similar, same director as well. But, yeah, Final Fantasy Tactics, number 10. At number 9 is Silent Hill 2, easily my favorite horror game, and, you know, I'm not a big fan of horror games, or horror in general, whether it be movies, books, TV, games. I don't know, I just find like a lot of horror is focused on jump scares, or as I like to call it, startling you, because it's not really a jump scare. It doesn't exactly scare you. But I don't know, I find a lot of horror games are just kind of dull. You know, I was able to actually finally get into the original Resident Evil, but I don't think that's a particularly scary game. It has a decent atmosphere, but the story is really cheesy, and I hate the tank controls. But Silent Hill 2, this game, I think, has one of the best stories in video games. Not only is this a really creepy game, like, the atmosphere is crazy. We'll talk about the atmosphere first. It is, like, the atmosphere in this game is so unnerving, and it makes you so uncomfortable. The apartments building that you go in, it's like the first kind of dungeon of the game. I've played through this game like 10 plus times, like I've beaten it multiple times, and that every time I get to that section of the game, I don't even like want to play. Like it's just like, oh man. And the enemy designs in this game are just creepy as fuck, like really interesting weird, creepy level designs that kind of tie into the story as well. A very emotional story with all sorts of different interesting endings, and it's really surprising because a lot of horror games I don't think are quite known for the storylines, but Silent Hill 2 has an amazing one. Obviously, the combat is not amazing, being an old kind of horror game, but the combat. You're not meant to really enjoy the combat in this game. You're meant to run away from the enemies that you come across. But it's got my favorite atmosphere in any game. Like it is like, and the game overall is just very disturbing. Deals with a lot of taboo themes that I don't really want to spoil for those that haven't played it. But yeah, this game tackles some themes that you don't see too often in video games. And yeah, it's one of the few games that I can safely say is actually creepy. Scary, I don't know if I would call it a scary game, but it's definitely unnerving and unsettling. It's got a very unsettling atmosphere. The music, of course, is amazing too. The sound design is absolutely incredible, and it is a big part of why the game's so creepy and the atmosphere is so incredible. The fog effects are fantastic too. Really, just a very memorable game. I'll always remember my first playthrough of that game and just like how crazy it was. But yeah, if there's a single horror game you play, and I say Silent Hill 2 is actually a game that even people that don't like horror games could enjoy, because the story is just so well told and interesting. So yeah, give Silent Hill 2 a shot. I think you might be surprised. The gameplay-wise, it's pretty dated, but there's no tank controls. Like, there is tank controls, but you can also do an option where it's just regular kind of movement, which is the way I like to play it. It's a good game for speedrunning, too. It's one of the few games I actually like to speedrun. You can get through it really quickly, but yeah, Silent Hill 2, definitely one of my favorite games of all time, at number 9. At number 8 is Mega Man 3. Not too much to say about this one. As you know, the Mega Man series is one of my favorite series in gaming. It was my childhood. It was one of my childhood, like my favorite series growing up. It's one of those series where I wanted to play every single game. I never got tired of it. Instead of renting a different game that I'd never played before, I would always rent Mega Man games. Often renting the same Mega Man game over and over again. And so I had to pick a favorite for this list because I want to keep the list to one game per series, and Mega Man 3 is the one I went with. I really like the X games as well, but the classic series gets the edge for me, and Mega Man 3 I feel is when the series was at its peak, basically. Although I don't think a lot of the later ones are as terrible as a lot of people think they are, with the addition of the charge shot. But Mega Man 3, you had your slide, you had Rush, was introduced in Mega Man 3, no charge shot, and it was just like the level designs are fantastic. It's got my favorite soundtrack in the series. Yes, I even prefer it over Mega Man 2's. It's quite a bit longer than previous Mega Man games too, is because you've got the Doc Robot stages. It's just one of those games where, as a kid, I just played it over and over again, and when I go back to it, it's one of the ones I kind of enjoy the most. Mega Man 5 was always the kind of nostalgic choice for me, but I think quality-wise, Mega Man 3 is probably my favorite. The only bad thing I could say about it is it's one of the easiest Mega Man games. The Doc Robot stages are fairly difficult, but other than that, you get a lot of energy tanks in this game, and it makes things pretty easy if you're willing to use those. So it's a good game to introduce newcomers to the series as well. The Mega Man series is always known for its kind of like really rough difficulty, but honestly, compared to a lot of NES games, I think they're actually on the easier side. Like they take some patience and some practice, but they're not. I don't think they're that bad, at least as much as people say they are. But Mega Man 3 is just a really enjoyable game. I've finished it multiple times. I've got a video on my channel, actually, like a playthrough of it, where I kind of review it as I play through it. If you guys want to check that out, I've done that for Mega Man 1 and 2 as well. I've considered trying to go back to that, but I don't know. I might do a playthrough of Mega Man 4 at some point, because yeah, I'm just such a huge fan of the series, and it's just a shame to see how it's where it is now. And I really liked Mega Man 9 and 10. I thought those were really excellent games. Mega Man 10 is actually close to being one of my favorites as well. But yeah, Mega Man 3 is just one of those classic games. I know most people will probably pick Mega Man 2. It's always that constant debate as to whether Mega Man 2 or 3 is better. For me, I prefer 3. And at number 7 is Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, my favorite platformer of all time. And this game is another one of those childhood favorites. I played this thing to death when I was a kid, even though I never did own it. It's interesting the risks this game took. When you do a sequel to Super Mario World, you'd think Nintendo would do, a sequel to Super Mario World, have it in the same style. But no, they just completely went outside the box and made this Yoshi game, which with some like puzzle elements. And some interesting, like an egg, like, you know, the egg throwing mechanic, which I thought was always interesting and creates some interesting levels. And this game has this game is pretty tough if you try to 100% it. In fact, it's probably one of the hardest platformers ever made. It's not too bad if you're just trying to beat it, and that's where I find it's most enjoyable, because I think it's actually almost a little too difficult and a little too hard to find all the different collectibles in the levels if you're trying to 100% it. But just playing through the game, it's such a joy. It controls so well. Like, the controls are just amazing. Like I said before, the levels are fantastic. Tons of variety to these levels. You know, the soundtrack in this game is incredible. I think it's one of the best soundtracks on the Super Nintendo. Some really amazing, really catchy songs in here. I find myself humming along to all these songs over and over again. It's one of those games that I've played through multiple times, and every time I pick it up and to play it again, I find myself beating it again. It's just a joy to play. It's just one of those games that it's got such a, like, the whole like mood it creates is just great. Like, it's just got this really happy, cheery tone to it that I really like. Although some of the songs towards the end of the game are a bit metal. The boss battles are really unique. I loved how they were basically little enemies that Kamek would come and make them like huge, gigantic versions of themselves. And the bosses kind of played out like puzzles in a way. And unfortunately, Yoshi's Island has had a bunch of shitty sequels. For whatever reason, they just can't capture the magic and level design and quality of this game. The closest is the new one, Woolly World on the Wii U. That game came very close, but I don't know. Yoshi's Island still gets the edge for me. It's yeah, in my opinion, it's the best platformer ever made. It's really fantastic. I like it more than Super Mario World. Definitely one of my favorite Super Nintendo games as well. So yeah, it definitely deserves to be on the list at number 7. And at number 6 is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Of course, the Zelda game had to be on here. It's one of my favorite series in gaming. I did a series review a few years back, and Majora's Mask was not number 1, actually. Playing the 3DS version cemented it as my favorite game in the series. This game, in my opinion, is a masterpiece, a flat-out masterpiece. There's some gameplay in it that's not super great. The whole Zora section of the game where you're getting the Zora eggs is a little tedious, but to me, this game has the best storytelling in the entire series, and I don't think the series is really all that great when it comes to storytelling, but I feel like the story here is just really somber and dark in tone compared to a lot of Zelda games. Obviously, with the moon about to crash down on the planet and destroy everything. And the characters you meet in this game, you really get to know them throughout the 3 days that you're constantly cycling through over and over again. You're kind of going through the same 3 days. These characters, you get to really get a feel for them as people, what they want in life. And things like that, and it's a bit heartbreaking to know that their lives are going to come to an end with this moon in the 3 days, and it's just, there's like this oppressive atmosphere that this game has, and it's just, there's a sense of foreboding that constantly is like, it's pervasive throughout the entire game, and it's really unsettling in a way, and it's kind of surprising that this is in a Zelda game. The dungeons, I think, are really fantastic. The Stone Tower Temple, I think, is one of the best dungeons in the series. The soundtrack is absolutely incredible. It made my top soundtracks list. It's like number 3. I think it really goes a long way to help kind of create the mood that this game has. It really, like, the atmosphere is one of the main reasons why I dig this game so much, and it's one of the few Zelda games I've 100%ed. When I try to 100% a game, that's how I know it's a quality game. And I've only ever done that with A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time as far as Zelda games go, and I did this with the 3DS version. Now, Majora's Mask, I must admit, is a bit hard for some people to get into. Some people just can't get past the whole time limit aspect of the game, but I think that's what makes it so unique and so special to me. And the 3DS version actually makes things a bit more accessible. You can kind of go back in time to a lot of different points. It's more forgiving in a lot of ways. Even though the Zora controls were made a bit worse in that version, and some of the boss fights were changed, I think, in some pretty bad ways. But the boss fight in the Snowhead Temple is still one of the best boss fights in the entire series. But I would highly recommend the 3DS version if you're going to play Majora's Mask, because I really think that made an already great game better. And Majora's Mask, it's a nostalgic game for me too. I played it when I was a kid. But it's one of those games that I didn't love it as much as Ocarina of Time when I was a kid. I enjoyed it. I always enjoyed my time with it, but it was one of those games where I've always felt like it was kind of inferior to Ocarina of Time. While now, I think it's quite the opposite. Actually, I think Majora's Mask has held up over time, and I think it's just got better story, better characters. I just like the tone of it better. I don't know. Majora's Mask is just it's an incredible game. I can't recommend it enough. Even for people that have played a few Zelda games and haven't liked them, I would even recommend it to those people because I really think it's different. It's very unique compared to a lot of the games in the series. It tried a new. It has all these new, fresh ideas. Nintendo could have just did another Ocarina of Time, and they pretty much did with Twilight Princess, which I'm not crazy about Twilight Princess, but yeah, Majora's Mask is just really special. I really absolutely love this game. At number 5 is Earthbound. Probably not a big surprise to anyone if they saw my top 20 Super Nintendo games video where this was number 1 on the list. This is another game I would consider a masterpiece. I've always been fond of this game. It's a game I played as a child, but I think it still holds up today. Now, this is a kind of a divisive game, though. Some people just do not like Earthbound at all. There's quite a few people out there that just do not like the series whatsoever. And then there's people that just absolutely fucking love this series. There's all these crazy fan sites like Starmen.net, which is like the cult following this game has is absolutely incredible. It's insane, really. And Mother 3 is also a terrific game as well, but Earthbound gets the edge for me. Definitely a nostalgic game. I played it as a kid. It was one of the first RPGs I ever played, but I didn't actually get to beat it until like years later. And this game, such a charming game. The writing in this game is amazing. It is so funny, so clever. It's one of the few RPGs where I wanted to talk to every single person in the game. Every single townsperson, every single character you'd come across, I was like, ooh, I just want to see what this person's going to say to me. And it would always surprise you. The locations you'd go to were so interesting. There's so many memorable moments in this game. There's some that I don't really want to spoil. There's a particular area in the game, kind of towards the midpoint, that's one of the craziest, zaniest locations I've ever seen in the game. It was awesome. Really hilarious, too. The soundtrack is very eclectic, taking inspiration from all sorts of different styles. And it's a wonderful soundtrack, too, I've talked about before. And Earthbound has had a huge influence, too. You see a lot of games that are inspired by Earthbound now. A lot of people seem to have grown up with this game and then went on to make games themselves. And it's just interesting to see the impact this game has had on the industry, and it's a shame that it didn't have the commercial success back when it came out. It's only now that people have kind of like really warmed up to Earthbound, and now it's considered like one of the all-time greats. The battle system I actually really like. It's very Dragon Quest style, where it's in first person, but there's this rolling health meter that I think is it's like a nice twist to the genre, where your health kind of rolls down when you get hit, and it rolls down to 0. And if you can pull off a heal in time, you can kind of heal yourself up, and before it kind of rolls down to 0. So if you take like fatal damage that would kill your character, you can kind of recover in time. If you heal quick enough, you're not going to actually die. So I think that kind of adds an interesting twist to the relatively simple combat. But the bosses, there's some really memorable bosses in this game. The final boss fight is just insane, and this game it's very lighthearted and humorous in tone, but it goes to some dark places later, especially towards the end of the game. A really interesting villain. There's a very interesting kind of villainous character that you kind of come across quite often in the game that I don't really want to spoil for those that haven't played it. It's really expensive to get a hold of this game on the Super Nintendo, but it's on the Wii U Virtual Console for like $10 or whatever. Highly worth it at that price. And it's one of those RPGs that I think is a fairly good one to start with. It's not the most challenging game out there, but it's not easy either. It will definitely still challenge you at certain spots. The only thing I don't like about it is the inventory system. It's a bit of a mess. It can be a bit cumbersome for sure. But it's an RPG I would recommend to people that don't really like RPGs all that much, just because just the style of it is so unique. And at the time, it was very unique too, because it's, you know, a modern day setting, which you never really saw RPGs like that back when it came out. And it has all these forward thinking ideas as well, where like there's no random encounters, and when you come across enemies that are way below your level, you instantly kill them and get the experience, which I don't know why that isn't in more RPGs. This game came out in like 1995 and had that, and just it took forever for any RPGs to take that, and still, you still see a lot of RPGs just completely ignore something like that, which is really stupid. But yeah, there's so much I could say about Earthbound, but yeah, just a really wonderfully unique, charming game that's one of the funniest games I've ever played as well. You know, I'll always be a huge fan of this game for sure. At number 4 is Zero Escape Virtue's Last Reward, and this is one of those games where I talked about it in like a top 10 of whatever the year it came out. I don't remember, 2013. I think it was only like number 5, mainly because of a game-breaking bug that I ran across in the 3DS version, but as time has went on, this game has actually climbed up on my list of favorite games, and now it's at number 4. This series, the Zero Escape series, is like a new favorite, all-time favorite series for me, and I can't wait for the third one that comes out this year, actually. And Virtue's Last Reward, I do prefer over 999, which is the original game. Virtue's Last Reward is a sequel to that, and this game got me into a whole new genre, the visual novel genre. And basically, the story with this game, I don't want to go into too much detail, but you have all these characters that are kind of trapped in a building, and they have to play this game called the Nonary game, and the characters can be killed off. And Virtue's Last Reward adds an interesting twist to things where you have the ally and betray mechanic, which I don't really want to spoil, but all I'll say is that mechanic adds some very interesting elements to the story and gameplay. Virtue's Last Reward is actually a much better game, I think, than the first one. I don't think the story is as strong, but it still has as many mind-blowing twists as 999. These two games, some of the most mind-blowing twists you'll ever see in a game. Like, they have some of the strongest storytelling, I think, even though some of the dialogue is a bit clunky at times. Very memorable characters in both games, but yeah, it's the game. There's a lot of interesting choices you're going to have to make, and Virtue's Last Reward is, I think, a much more playable game than the first. The first one, you had to replay different puzzle rooms over and over again to get to multiple different endings, but Virtue's Last Reward has a flowchart of sorts where you can kind of jump to different timelines, and that just makes things so much more smoother. It's so much easier to get all the many different endings, and this game, there's so many twists and turns. Like, it blew my mind so many times. It's just absolutely crazy. Very dark. I love how dark these games are. The atmosphere in these games is fantastic, especially when combined with the very moody music. It's definitely some of the darker Japanese games I've played, and there's not a whole lot of like tropes, really, like Japanese kind of anime-ish tropes in these games. There's some dialogue that kind of leans towards that stuff, but there's hardly any fan service to speak of, and they're very dark in tone for sure. And yeah, it just really surprised me. And it's one of the few games where I've actually enjoyed the puzzles. Because a lot of, in both these games, you have to escape these rooms. And to escape these rooms, you have to do a bunch of puzzles. Most of them are logic puzzles, but you have, obviously, some puzzles where you have to combine some items together, some math puzzles, but there's the sheer variety of puzzles is insane, actually. And I think, actually, quite a few of them are quite clever. And, like, very few ever actually pissed me off. So yeah, that's a huge surprise too. A game where I actually enjoy puzzles, because usually I just hate puzzles in every video game I play. But in here, I thought they were, I don't know, very mentally stimulating, and I really enjoyed them. I think 999 probably had better puzzles overall, but Virtue's Last Reward still has some good ones. But mainly these games are amazing for their storylines and characters and all the crazy twists and turns that you'll find throughout the game. And they're the types of games that can only be done on the DS, sort of, and just in games in general. It's the kind of story that you can't really translate to TV or movies or anything like that, which is, I think, really unique and well done. So yeah, give it a chance. This series, I think, needs more attention. It needs more fans. But yeah, it got me into visual novels as a whole. I've gone on to try like the Phoenix Wright games, the Danganronpa games, which are fantastic, Steins Gate, things like that. So it got, not only is it an incredible game, it got me into a whole new genre. So definitely, Virtue's Last Reward is definitely one of my all-time favorite games. At number 3 is Persona 3, and yeah, this is another game that made me into a huge fan of the series. It was the first Shin Megami Tensei game I've played, and I still need to play quite a few more, but yeah, I'm a big Persona fan now. This game, Persona 3, made me a believer. Persona 4 is also incredible, and that was very close, because I knew I had to choose between this or Persona 4, and in the end I went with Persona 3, mainly because I like the characters a little more in Persona 3. I like the story, the kind of murder mystery type story of Persona 4 a little more, but I prefer the characters and kind of the darker tone that Persona 3 has, and I actually kind of prefer Tartarus to the multiple dungeons of Persona 4. That's a minority opinion. I know I'm in the minority there, but yeah, Persona 3, absolutely amazing game. The characters, the Persona games have some of the best character development I've seen in a JRPG. And the whole school life aspect to it, I thought was really unique at the time when I first played it. And social links are one of those things that, you know, are in almost every JRPG now that I see. The Persona games have kind of had a huge impact, and they've kind of gotten bigger and bigger, and now they have like a huge fan base, and Persona 5 is like one of my most anticipated games of all time. And a big reason for that is because of Persona 3. The characters here are just utterly fantastic, and the game has got a lot of humor to it. It's very funny at times. Like, there's always like these really great humorous moments. Like I remember Persona 3. I always remember the time when they all go to the beach on like a vacation of sorts. But you kind of, you know, you kind of go to school in these games, and you kind of live out school life. And the games are very addictive. Like, Persona 3 is super addictive. It's the kind of game that you just can't put down because it's got such a good flow to it, where you'll go to school for a bit and hang out with your friends, and then you'll go into Tartarus and clear a few floors of the dungeon and get into those really fun battles. And then you'll be, you know, just when you're about to get sick of Tartarus and fighting, you go back to the school life and kind of build up your social links again. And it's this flow that just keeps you going, and you don't want to stop playing. The battle system is amazing. It's got the press turn system, which I love so much. It's really snappy and quick, and most importantly, fun. It's really fun to kind of figure out the weaknesses of these enemies. It's fun getting your different personas. Just a really smooth, fast battle system. No random encounters. You can see the enemies on the map when you're dodging them in Tartarus. But yeah, it's Persona 3. It's just one of those games where at the end of it, and this was the same with Persona 4, I was kind of a bit sad because it was the last time I was going to spend time with these characters. It's one of the few RPGs where I finish it and I feel sad because I don't get to spend any more time with these fantastic characters. You really just kind of grow to really love and appreciate these characters more so than like any RPG I've ever played. And I think that's why I like the Persona games so much. Like, basically everything it does, I just love. Basically, I know a lot of people aren't a huge fan of the dungeons, and they are fairly weak. They're kind of just big mazes of sorts, but at least Tartarus is. But and the dungeons of Persona 4. But I didn't mind so much, actually. But building the social links again was fun too, and the character development for all these characters is fantastic. And the social links tie in with the battle system and give you all these different benefits, which I love. Easily one of the best JRPGs I've ever played. And now I'm just like a hardcore Persona fan. And Persona 5, I think, even though I love Persona 3, it's one of my all-time favorite games, I think there's stuff that you can improve on. So I think Persona 5 is going to be an incredible game. I just cannot wait for that. But Persona 3, highly recommended. And it's one of those games where it's like I would like to play it again. I want to actually play that PSP version because I've actually only played the PS2 one. But I am kind of surprised how high it's climbed on my list of favorite games. But it's one of those games I can't stop thinking about after finishing it all these years ago. And Persona 4 is pretty much just as good too. So yeah, Persona 3, incredible game. At number 2 is Undertale. Yup, a game that came out in 2015, and it's already my second favorite game of all time. And I knew it had a shot of making the list. But when I was putting it together, I like it better than a lot of other games. It really blew me away, this game, in a way that most games just don't. And I even like it more than Earthbound, which is a game that the creator was very much influenced by, and he started out by making Earthbound hacks. But Undertale is one of those games. It's very popular now. It has a huge audience now and cult following. So obviously with that, you see a lot of haters. I've seen a lot of hate thrown at this game, and you know, it's not going to be for everyone. It's not going to be for everyone for sure. There's parts of the game that can drag a little bit, especially towards the end. The gameplay is not amazing. The battle system I still think is unique as fuck because the bullet hell segment that it adds I think is really interesting, and the way that mechanic kind of evolves as you go throughout the game I think is genius, and some of those boss battles are just really creative, I think. But, you know, the actual puzzles in the game are pretty basic, and they're not a whole lot of fun. And, you know, it's a fairly short game, but I actually like how short it is, but especially since it's so replayable. But it's one of those games that's just, I can't spoil too much. Again, I've talked about this game a bunch, but to say too much would really spoil what makes it special. But this game, the most emotional I've ever gotten is when I've played this game, surprisingly, at least as far as video games go. And the genocide and pacifist roots, I think, are both very interesting and both very much worth seeing. And this game really plays with your expectations as far as JRPGs go in some very interesting ways. The way this game's storytelling is presented is, I think, very unique and kind of refreshing. It's a very humorous game with plenty of just really charming dialogue, but it can also be a very dark game, a very disturbing game at times too. And yeah, there's just so many crazy twists throughout this game. Like, there's quite a few moments where I was just like, holy shit. And then there's quite a few moments where it just, like, the feels were just, like, too much, man. The soundtrack in this game. The soundtrack, I've already talked about how amazing the soundtrack is, but seriously, it's one of the best soundtracks in video games. It's absolutely incredible. And there's all these different kind of motifs as far as the soundtrack goes. And it's really one of the best parts about the game, I would say. But yeah, Undertale, what a surprise! It just came out of nowhere for me. I would have not expected a game to come out in 2015 and you know, end up being one of my all-time favorite games. It's like I'll always kind of treasure the time I spent with it. I'll always remember it. I'm very curious to see what the creator Toby Fox does next, because yeah, what a game, man, what a game. I realize though it's not going to be for everyone. I think this game did was just like, this game was just for me. I was always going to be the type of person that was really going to love this game. You know, obviously being a big fan of Earthbound, but yeah, so maybe I love this game more than most people, and maybe I'm probably hyping it up a bit too much for some people. Some people might go into it, enjoy it, but find it overrated based on some of the things I've said and what other people have said, because, yeah, the fan base is crazy for this game. But I don't know, I can't deny it. It really is one of my favorite games of all time. It's absolutely stellar, and it's just, yeah, number 2 on my list. And at number 1, no surprises here, Dark Souls, my all-time favorite game. I've said this multiple times. I don't want to sound like a broken record here, so I'm going to keep this short, but what I love about Dark Souls, well, okay, first, the sense of exploration and discovery in this game and this series is unmatched. The sense of discovery is so amazing in this game. Like, its exploration has never been so rewarding and satisfying to me. The RPG elements, I think, are actually extremely well done. I really like all the weapon and build variety, all the different types of weapons and builds that you can kind of have in these games. I like the lore in these games. I like how it's delivered to you, and there's not tons of exposition and cutscenes all over the place. I love the challenging tactical combat. I do prefer kind of the slower nature of Dark Souls, kind of this sword and shield magic-based combat of Dark Souls, but Bloodborne also has fantastic combat. The level design in the Souls games is some of the best in gaming, especially right now when you know, we've got a lot of games with like just really terrible level design. Last of Us, Uncharted, but yeah, the Souls games just. Oh man, like the soundtracks are always good in them. They're so addictive too. I can't stop playing them. Of course, you have the unique online elements to the game. The messaging systems, the cool co-op, the PvP. The atmosphere is just absolutely amazing in these games. Maybe not so much with Dark Souls 2, but yeah, Dark Souls 3. Obviously, I'm insanely excited for this game. I cannot wait for this game, and it's I don't know. Again, I've talked about this series so much. Basically, if you haven't played them, I'd say probably start with Demon Souls though. Even though Dark Souls is my favorite in the series, Dark Souls, I'll admit, is kind of, it's almost like a nostalgic game for me at this point, and it's the game that got me into this series. But you know, there's aspects of it that are weaker than some of the other games in the series, but I feel like it's the most replayable game. It's the game I come back to the most. It's got some of the best boss fights in the series. The DLC is particularly good. Artorias is like one of the best boss fights in gaming history. Yeah, just an incredible game, and the impact it's had on the industry is just insane. It's crazy to think about, especially when considering the year it came out, 2011. You know, it had its fans, but it was one of those games that it was well received. People enjoyed it, but Skyrim was the big game of 2011. Skyrim was the game everyone talked about. And now, what the hell, Skyrim? Like, no one talks about Skyrim anymore. Who cares about Skyrim? But Dark Souls still has this lasting impact. People are still talking about it. People are still playing it. And now look at the series. It's this big, huge series that's done quite well commercially, too, which I'm glad. Because, yeah, it definitely is a bit of a hardcore series. But, yeah, and it's one of those series where I feel like the challenge is fair, of course. And I'm not the type of person that enjoys hard games, really. But I don't know, the Souls games just do it right. But, yeah, I could go on and on and on. Dark Souls, my favorite game of all time. Alright, so there's my top 10. Now let's get into the honorable mentions, and there's quite a few of them. I'm just going to say a very few things about all of them, because there's a lot to go through here. All of these basically had a chance of making the list, but just didn't quite make it. Mother 3, which I talked about previously. Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, my favorite Mario RPG. I think that game is absolutely outstanding, and we might actually get a proper follow-up on the Wii U, which is exciting to think about. Shovel Knight, which I think is one of the best indie platformers of like the last 5 years. Like, that game is just incredible. It borrows everything great about the old school games that it's influenced by, but at the same time it has some really clever new kind of design decisions of its own. Really spectacular game. Amazing soundtrack as well. Donkey Kong Country 2, which is one of my favorite platformers of all time. I think it's the best in that original trilogy. Amazing level design. One of the best soundtracks of all time. Really fantastic stuff there. One of the best Super Nintendo games. Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, two of my favorite JRPGs. Chrono Trigger was very close to making it, and actually, you know what? No, Chrono Cross I actually think I prefer. You know, they're both kind of different games, but I really enjoy both. I think Chrono Cross is really underrated. Suikoden 2, which is actually probably my favorite PS1 RPG. I don't know, it's close between another, but Suikoden 2 has like one of the best storylines in any JRPG I've seen. Probably my favorite villain in any RPG. Luca Blight, I think, is just absolutely fantastic. We have Final Fantasy 8 and 9. 8 mainly for its gameplay and junction system, which I actually really enjoyed, and then 9, which has one of my favorite cast of characters in a JRPG. Really fantastic stuff there. Super Mario Bros. 3, a childhood favorite. It's probably my favorite traditional Mario game, although Super Mario World's quite close, and that's another amazing game. Pokemon Blue and Red, very nostalgic choices. They probably don't hold up too well these days, but they were one of the first RPGs I ever played, basically. They pretty much got me into the genre as a whole. I think it might have been the first RPG I ever completed. I'm pretty sure. That sounds about right. Shin Megami Tensei 4 on the 3DS, which is probably my favorite 3DS game still. It was my favorite game of the year that it came out. Really, really great game, especially gameplay-wise. Amazing turn-based battle system in that one. Snatcher, which is one of my favorite visual novels, actually. I would consider it a visual novel. It's one of those games that I wish more people played. I wish it was released on like a newer system or something, because you basically have to emulate it unless you're willing to pay the ridiculous prices for it on the Sega CD, which is a shame because I think that game's awesome. Like, a really great storyline in that game, and it's actually my favorite Kojima game because, you know, I'm not crazy about Metal Gear Solid. Resident Evil 4 is one of those classics. I loved it to death when it came out, but I don't know if it would hold up that well. That's one of those games I'd like to go back to someday, and that's one of those ones that I think if I played it again, I'd like it just as much as I did when I first played it. That might have a good shot at making the top 10. Tales of Vesperia, which is my favorite Tales game, and Tales is one of my favorite JRPG series. So yeah, that's another great game. I still feel like that's the best one in the series, and they haven't quite made a game that's as good as that since. And it had the traditional world map, which I missed so much from that series. But Jet Set Radio Future, which I think a super underrated game, probably the best game on the original Xbox, and that's another game I'd like to play again. If it's as good as I remembered it, then it probably has a good shot at making the top 10. Xenogears, which is probably tied with Suikoden 2 as my favorite RPG on the PS1. Just a really dense story that's very, I don't know, that game tackles some very interesting themes, and it's a very complex game. But I actually really liked the gameplay in that game too. I thought it was quite good, and I didn't actually have a problem with Disc 2 all that much. I didn't mind it so much. I know a lot of people hate that game because of Disc 2, and yeah, the game obviously is not completely finished, but I don't know. It didn't bother me as much as it does for some people. Jet Force Gemini, which knowing me, the character in that game, Floyd, is what I use as my YouTube profile picture. But that's another game I'd like to play again because I feel like it probably hasn't aged all that well. It's on the Rare Replay collection, and based on what I've heard from a lot of people, the controls are like crap. Like a lot of people think that game just controls like garbage and is unplayable for today's standards, but I don't know. It's a childhood favorite of mine. It's it's a very nostalgic game to me, and I think it's quite unique too, because it's like this mix of like Zelda, Mega Man Legends, and Metroid. It's this weird game. Like Rare really tried something new with that game. I thought it was really interesting, and I don't know. It's another game I'd like to play again, even though I have finished it like at least 3 times. Banjo-Kazooie, which is probably my favorite platformer, or 3D platformer of all time. Yes, I think it's actually better than Mario 64. Controversial opinion, maybe. Metroid Prime, which is my favorite Metroid game. I still need to play the rest of the series, because that was a recent game I got into, which I didn't like when it first came out, but now I love it. The the Mass Effect trilogy is pretty fantastic on the whole, even with the disappointing third one. And I actually think the first one is still the best of the 3 by quite a bit. I actually prefer the first one to the second one. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is my favorite Castlevania game. I think that game is absolutely amazing. I still need to play more. Area of Sorrow on the GBA might eclipse it when I do eventually get around to that, but Symphony of the Night is still obviously a fantastic game. Rock Band 2, I spent like thousands of hours on that game. So it's the musical instrument games are kind of dead now, but I'm always going to have some good memories with Rock Band 2 for sure. So it's definitely one of my favorite games still. Knights of the Old Republic, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic was one of my favorite Xbox games. One of the best twists in gaming history, though it's probably predictable by today's standards. Perfect Dark. Yeah, one of my favorite first-person shooters from back in the day. I played the Xbox Live Arcade remake not too long ago, and it's held up decently. The level design is weird in that game. You don't see levels like that anymore with the multiple objectives and not much guide posting. Really, it's interesting. I actually like the level design in that game compared to a lot of shooters of today, but. Yeah, I still think that game holds up decently. I think that game's still pretty fun, but loved the multiplayer back in the day. GoldenEye, I don't think it has held up quite as well as Perfect Dark has. Rhythm Heaven Fever, I think, is a really underrated game on the Wii. It's probably my favorite rhythm game, and I'm not much of a rhythm game fan, because that game actually requires actual rhythm. But very fun, charming game, that one. Max Payne 3, which is probably the best third-person shooter as far as mechanics go. Like, that game... I have not played a shooter with shooting that feels as good as it does in that game. It's just so satisfying, so slick. That game controls like a dream. I even like the story and the cutscenes. I know a lot of people were turned off by that, but I didn't mind it so much. The gameplay is stellar in that game. It's weird how the Grand Theft Auto games are like really sluggish compared to Max Payne 3. I don't understand it. I really like the Max Payne 1 and 2 as well. So yeah, that series in general I quite like. Persona 4, like I mentioned before. Half-Life 2, which is probably my favorite first-person shooter of all time. Really a benchmark first-person shooter for when that came out. Ogre Battle 64, up until Tactics, that was my favorite strategy RPG. Very underrated game. The best RPG on the N64, I think. And I think more people need to play Ogre Battle 64. I don't hear people talk about that game all that much. And finally, Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, which was my first big open-world Western RPG. And I still think it's Bethesda's best game. I prefer it over like Skyrim and especially Oblivion, which I didn't like that much. But Fallout New Vegas is probably the best of their games with like their engine, even though Obsidian obviously did that one, which is another great game. But yeah, those are all the honorable mentions. That took a little while to get through. But what are some of your guys' favorite games of all time? What would your top 10 be? But yeah, that's it, guys. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.